Well, good morning, church family. You guys sound great. I hope everyone is having a great week. Everyone's doing great. We are in the middle of our study of the book of James, and guess what? I love the book of James. Do you know why I love the book of James? Let me tell you why I love the book of James. I love the book of James because it challenges us to put our faith into practice. Because the book of James reminds us that following Jesus is bigger than just believing true things about Jesus. It's about allowing the message of Jesus to transform every way we live. At the end of the series, there's going to be a test to see who can say that. It's going to be amazing. No. But it's true. And it's one of the and it's interesting. Like, I've gotten a lot of really good feedback during the James series, but most of the feedback sounds something like this, okay? And someone said it to me this morning, right? But I've heard this again and again and again throughout the James series. And the feedback I've gotten is this. Man, Chris, like the James, gosh, it's been really good, but man, I just feel so challenged and convicted every week. It's like, especially the words one, the one talking about the words, I was like, oh my goodness. Like, I hear that kind of stuff all throughout this James series, and James is challenging. And if you think you feel challenged, imagine having to stand up here and talk about it and know that it's like, gosh, am I living up to half of it? It's like, it's so challenging. But that's the point. Because James is challenging his readers to understand that following Jesus, it really is. It's more than just believing all of the true things about God. It's about allowing the gospel to transform our lives, to change the way that we live, how we think, how we live, how we love, how we treat people, how we view adversity, how we judge circumstances and people, the words that we say, and the plans that we make. Because the plans that we make, I was thinking every choice you make, or was it, how's it go? Every step you take, I'll be watching you. Yeah, I think is that in the Bible? No, it's fine. Let's take this part out of the live stream. We don't need that. People don't need to see that. No, but it's the idea that our choices, our decisions, the plans that we make, it impacts the course and the direction of our life. And oftentimes, right, we look back on those choices with gratitude, I'm so glad or with regret, right? Oh, I wish I had. And I'm going to tell you about one choice that I made that I look back on with regret. Years ago, Mary and I, this year, we're going to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary, so there you go. So 20 years ago, thank you. That's why I said it. I just wanted some applause. No, 20 years ago, I decided to propose to Mary. Now, Mary and I had been dating for about 2 years, and look, I knew she was the one right away, but she needed convincing, so it was fine. But we finally get to the point, and it's like, okay, I'm ready to propose, and I made a decision. I made a choice, I made a plan to play a practical joke on the woman, that's right, on the woman that I was going to ask to marry me. And I decided to play this joke 2 days before I decided to propose. And here I stand before you, still alive. It's amazing. So we were having a date night, and we were having a movie night, and I had planned this movie night, and I decided that I thought it'd be funny to kind of mess with her head and get her thinking about proposals, and then not propose, and then a couple of days later propose. I know, it's such a jerk move, okay? I get it. I don't even know why I'm telling you this story. So it's like Friday night, we're doing a date night, and I'm like, okay, all right, Mary, we're going to do a movie night, and here are your 2 choices. And there were 2 movies, and one of them, I forget the title, it was like a wedding movie, and then the other one was So I Married an Axe Murderer. Was like the second one. Yeah, I asked her this choice, right? And so she picks her movie. She didn't pick that one. And we watch it, but it was some kind of wedding movie kind of thing. And then I bought her a necklace as a gift, which sounds like such a nice thing. but it's in a long box, and I put it in a bag with the name of the store on it. It was called the Jewelry Store, and I left it sitting on the table in the room where we're watching the movie so she would see it. So all throughout this movie, she's like, we're watching these wedding-related movies, and then we've got the jewelry thing, and that kind of thing. And she's told me since then, she was like, I thought to myself, at one point, I had to go to the bathroom. I was furious, and she looked in the mirror, and she's like, all right, listen, if he proposes, I'm going to kill him. If he doesn't propose, I'm going to kill him. It's like, and so then I give this long, whatever. I give her the gift and talk about why I'm not proposing tonight and all this stuff. It was all just stupid. It was so dumb. And I thought it was hilarious. And then 2 days later, I actually proposed. And looking back on it now, I'm amazed that she said yes. But she did. She said yes. Which, she's not here this morning. She's downstairs doing children's ministry, which is why I feel safe to tell this story, and that's the only reason. But the point is, the choices that we make, the decisions that we make, the plans that we put into place, they affect things in our lives, sometimes for good, sometimes for not great. I'm amazed she said yes, but listen, it was still painful. And that's the point. So when we think about our plans, when we think about our decisions, when we think about the choices that we make, it's like they matter, and we need to get them right. And this is what James is going to help us with this morning, because it may prompt the question, well, gosh, if it's so important that I get my choices right, that I don't want to look back with regret, I want to look back with gratitude, is it possible to get God involved in the plan? Is it possible, that I can, if I say the magic words and, do the right movements, I can somehow get God to just sign off on my plans, and I can get him to just bless whatever I want to do? Is that even possible? How does all of that even work? Well, that's what we're going to talk about this morning, because James is going to challenge us in the way that we think about the choices we make, the decisions that we make, the plans that we put in place. That's what we're going to talk about today. So grab your Bibles. Open up to James chapter 4. That's page 1291 if you're using the seatback Bibles in front of you. And we're going to begin right at verse 13. So look at how James begins. He says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit." So right from the start, James lets us know who he's talking to. He's talking to people who make plans, right? And in a lot of ways, that's all of us, isn't it? Now it's certainly, he uses kind of the motif of like the businessman, the business person who is like making these plans about, okay, we're going to go here and we're going to do this and here's the strategy and here's how it's going to turn out and all of that kind of stuff. So James begins to address people who make plans. Now, as we're going to see in just a few moments, James' issue, the place where James is going to really challenge us, is not about making plans. In fact, in this passage, James is not going to advocate for some kind of laissez-faire attitude toward life. Well, let's just take life as it comes and let's just see what happens. And, I don't know, we shouldn't plan. That's not James' point. As we're going to see, the issue that James is going to get at is the issue of control. This is where James is heading. Because in so many ways, right, planning is an act of control, right? And when we make our plans, we're effectively saying, listen, my life has a preferred outcome, right? The next 5 years for me, there is a preferred outcome. I'd like for us to get here and to accomplish this, and this is what I would like life to look like for us in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. And so I have put the plans in place that will get us to our preferred end, right? So in so many ways, planning for the future is an act of control, right? It's an act of deciding, this is where I want my life to go, this is where I want it to end up, and this is how we're going to get there. And James is saying planning is not a bad thing, but he challenges us to think about our planning. He presents in the next verse a problem as it relates to our planning. And the problem is this: we're not qualified. Look at what he says next. He says, you're going to do all these things, right? Yet, you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. James makes the point about our planning. It's like, listen, you're going to plan for the future, but you're not qualified for this because you don't know what the future holds. You don't know what tomorrow brings. I know what you're thinking. You're like, Chris, this is so deep and so astounding. I've never considered the fact that I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. How do you do it? I know. I'm going to admit, I thought that would get a bigger laugh than it did. But it's okay. We're going to move on. But that's James' point. That it's like, because you've experienced this before, right? Where you've made your plans, right? And you've done your best thinking, and you've tried to imagine the scenario and put it into place, and you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Let's get on the road. And then something that you didn't see coming turns your plans upside down. It's like, okay, hey, this is what the next season of life is going to look like. This is what we're going to do. And then something happens that you didn't expect, and it turns your plans upside down. And this is James' point, that it's like, listen, our problem is when we plan for the future, like you and I, we have no idea what tomorrow will bring. The second problem, so James makes this problem, is that we lack knowledge of the future. That's our problem, that we don't have that. The second problem that James brings up is that we're finite. James describes us as a mist, that it's like we're here today and gone tomorrow. He talked about that in chapter 1, right? That our life is so short, so we lack a big enough perspective to make good decisions about, gosh, where we're going, and to be the one calling all the shots. And more than that, it's like we're finite. We don't have the authority to really control where our life is going to go. And so James is like, listen, you people who are making these plans, you who say, we're going to go here, we're going to do this, and this is how it's going to go, and we're going to control the outcome and all. It's like, listen, you have no idea. Here's the problem. You have no idea what tomorrow will bring. And your life is so short. You lack the perspective needed. And this is the problem for us. And James offers a solution. Okay, so here's his solution. Here's what he says in the next verse. Verse 15, instead of doing that, here's what you should do instead. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills. Siri, no one is talking to you. Guys, I think we got it. We're good. Maybe I should take that off. Verse 15, it says, let's see if it happens again. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. James makes the point, listen, planning for the future is not the problem. James is not advocating for don't make plans and don't try to make good decisions and don't try to set things in a direction. But it's really, what James is going after our attitude. Our attitude in our planning should be one of humility, one of submission, one of surrender, one that says, listen, God, I understand. Listen, I don't know what's coming tomorrow, but you do. God, I don't have the eternal perspective over my life from beginning to end to see all these things, but you do. God, I'm not in control of how things turn out, but you are. And so in light of that, God, I want to surrender my plans to you. James says, listen, that when you think about your planning, it's not that you shouldn't make plans. You should make plans. But James would challenge you to make your plans with open hands. This is how you make your plans. Listen, I'm going to do the best job I can trying to think this through, trying to work this out, trying to make the decisions. But ultimately, I recognize that I'm not in control of my life. And so I'm going to surrender control. God, you're the one who's in control. So I hold my plans to you with open hands. And I'm inviting you to be God in my life. Change things as you see fit. When surprises come, Lord, I'm not going to freak out. I'm going to trust you. Because I'm not going to grip my plans so tightly, because that's what it is, right? It's an act of control. I want my life to go a certain way. That's the destination. That's where we're going to be in 5 years. That's what's going to happen with my kids. That's what's going to happen in our retirement. This is how it's going to turn out, and I'm going to make it happen. Whatever it takes. It's like, no. Listen, you don't have the wisdom to do that. You don't have the perspective to do that, and you're not in control. So when you make your plans with open hands. And then look at what James says next. Verse 16, he says, as it is, if you don't do this, if you keep doing it the way you've been doing it, as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Evil. James keeps using that word. You notice all throughout James, we keep seeing that word when he challenges us with our self-sufficiency, with our control, with all these areas. He describes it as evil. He talked about that last week, and he talked about that 2 weeks ago. He keeps using that word. It's so challenging and disturbing because I don't want to think about myself in that way, but it makes sense. Because James says when we seize autonomy from God, when we take control, when we decide this is where it's going and I'm going to make it happen and nothing's going to stand in my way. God, I'm not interested in what you, listen, yay for you, but, and I want to go to heaven, but I'm doing this, right? This is what I'm doing. When we seize control like that, James describes that as evil. He's like, don't do that. Don't take the place of God in your own life. When you make your plans, do the best job you can, all of that, but make your plans with open hands. Be okay for God to step in and change things and take you in a direction that maybe you weren't expecting. Don't seize control from God. Make your plans with open hands. Last thing he says, verse 17, and this is a verse that, maybe we read this verse and we think, well, gosh, this seems out of place, but I don't think it is. Look at what he says, verse 17. He says, so, and he begins with the word so to let us know that what he's about to say is connected to what he just said, right? So it's like this concluding thing. It's like, so in light of all of that, so because of this, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him, it is sin. James makes the point that, listen, when we know what is good and what is right and what is appropriate, what we should do, and we don't do it, that's sinful. And in the context of what we're talking about here, James includes this to remind us that, listen, when we choose to seize autonomy for ourselves, when we choose to be the ones in control, it's like when we make our plans with closed fists, right, instead of open hands. When we know the right thing to do is to live surrendered to God, but we don't do it, it's like that's sin. So don't do that. Make your plans. And you should plan, but make your plans with open hands. And what I'd like to do for the remainder of our time, and I hope this is helpful, I want to talk a little bit about what could that look like practically, maybe on the front end of our planning. Because it's one thing to say, okay, listen, hey, I've decided, and maybe you use the road trip as the mental example, right? That it's like, hey, okay, we've made a plan, we're going on a road trip, and we're going to head to this destination, and these are the stops along the way, and then things happen, the car breaks down, or we end up, there's a storm, we have to go in a different direction, our plans change, so it's like, okay, when that happens, I'm going to not freak out, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to trust God. It's like, we get that. That's kind of the make your plans with open hands, be open to the fact that God may move things around, absolutely. But maybe if you're like me, it makes you think, gosh, well, is it possible to engage in open-handed planning on the front end? Like, is it possible when I'm making my plans, when I'm thinking about the future, when I'm working those stuff out, is it possible to involve God in the planning process on the front end of things? And I think that's the smart thing to do. I think that's the wise thing to do. So I just want to give some practical advice. I have come up with 4 questions that you can ask as you plan for the future, as you think about decisions that you have to make. Some of you have big decisions in front of you. As you think about the choices that you're going to make, it's like, okay, well, how can I involve God in my decision-making process? I want to suggest 4 questions. There's nothing special about these questions. I just made them up. The first one feels pretty obvious, and then the last 3, I think, are kind of a special. So let me put the first one up here. As I have to make decisions, as I'm thinking about the future, as I'm headed in a direction, do the scriptures speak directly about this? As I have to make a decision, does God's word speak about the decision I have to make? Does it speak directly about the decision I have to make? Sometimes it does, right? And we live maybe in the best time that you can live in as it relates to this, because you don't have to be a Bible scholar, right? It's like, well, I don't, it's like, gosh, well, where am I going to find it? You know what I mean? It's like all of us can go online. What does the Bible say about, right? And, openbible.com, I think, pops up a lot of times, and it gives you all these passages that speak about different issues. So it's like we have it easier than ever to explore what the scriptures say about one thing or another. But as you have to make decisions, I think the best question you can ask is, do the scriptures speak directly about what I'm facing? And if the answer is yes, then you should go with what the scriptures say on it. That the scriptures speak on this, you should obey. But a lot of times, the decisions that we have to make, the scriptures are silent on. Right? Like there's no Bible verse that tells me, should I take the job in Cincinnati? Right? Or do I need to move out to the West Coast? It's like, you don't get a Bible verse on that. So it's like, so what do you do in those instances? That's where I wrote these next 3 questions just to help you thinking about. Because in those moments when you have to make here's the first question. When the scriptures don't speak directly on a subject, well, you want to ask yourselves, well, what do I know that the scriptures have already said about God's will for me? And so here's a question. Which decision most helps me love God and become like Christ? Because you already know that is God's will for you. You already know God is at work in your life to help you love Him and to help you become like Jesus. That's God's will for you. So in every decision that you make, it's important to ask the question, okay, if I'm picking between Cleveland and LA, I don't know. Does one decision over another, is there a factor here where one helps me love God and become like Christ more than the other? If as I'm making, hey, where are we going to end up in the next 5 years? Well, which path helps me become more like Christ? Which path helps me love God? That is God's will for you. And it should be a part of your thinking as you plan the future, as you think about the future. The next question, which decision helps me love people best? As I have to decide on my preferred future, on where my life is heading, is there a direction, is there a decision that helps me love people better? Because that is God's will for you. When Jesus was asked what's most important, He said, hey, let me tell you the most important thing. It's to love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And then there's a second one. You can't do one without the other. They're connected. And love your neighbor as yourself. When Jesus was hours from the cross, He told His guys, hey, a new commandment I have for you. You love one another the same way that I've loved you. And that's how the whole world's going to know that you're mine. When you have a decision to make, when you have a choice in front of you and you don't know what to do, and the scriptures are silent, is this a sin? Should I do that? I get those questions all the time. Guys, well, is such and such a sin? The translation is, I would like to do such and such a thing, and I would like to know if I can get away with it. And it's like the better question is, which choice helps me love people better? Which choice helps me love God and become like Christ more? Which decision, which job do I take? School do I go to? Person do I date? All of those kinds of choices where it's like the scriptures are silent on those things. But God's will for you is to become like Christ, to love God, to love people. Last question. Which decision allows me to move the mission of Jesus forward? Because that is God's will for you. Jesus is on a mission in the world to rescue the world. Jesus is on a mission in the world to bring light into darkness, to bring hope where there's hopelessness, to take the light of the gospel everywhere. And he has chosen to use us. It's one of the reasons why when you place your faith in Christ, God doesn't just immediately take you to heaven. He leaves us here to help us become like Christ, but also because he's on mission. And he has a role for us to play. You and I have a responsibility to play our part in the mission of Jesus. And so when you're planning, when you're trying to choose between Cincinnati and Cleveland, those are both in the same state, so maybe that's not great. But when you're trying to make those choices, you should ask the question, which decision, which choice, which path helps me more effectively move the mission of Jesus forward? I'm not saying that question needs to be the only question that you ask as you plan, right? But it needs to be part of the planning. It needs to be considered. But for most of us, listen, let's just be honest. When we make plans, that question is never considered. And it should be. It should be in the mix. So what do? How do you make plans with open hands? On the front end, you ask yourself, hey, as I'm trying to decide on something, as I'm trying to make it, do the scriptures speak directly about this? Well, if they do, I'm going with that. If they don't, well, which decision helps me love God and become like Christ? Which decision helps me love people better? Which decision helps me most effectively move the mission of Jesus forward? These aren't the only questions you should ask. In fact, I'm sure that you can probably come up with way better questions. But the point is, when the scriptures don't speak directly, you can still make decisions. You just make decisions based on, hey, what do you know is God's revealed will for you? What do I already know? That no matter what decision I make, God wants this for me. And you factor that in to your decision-making process. But after you've done that, after you've thought about it and prayed about it and you answered my dumb little questions and, it's like, okay, and you've tried to make the best plan that you can make, right? The plan that most honors God, that serves people, all of that. You've made your plan and you're like, okay, I've tried to do my best, God, to make a plan that honors you and all of that. And when you do that, then you take your plan and you hold it with open hands. Meaning you allow yourself to be okay with God stepping in. Because it could be that after you've done all of that, God may step in and move you and the people that you love in a direction that you were not anticipating. And that's okay. That's what it means to make your plans with open hands. Okay, I have one more list. It's a 3-thing list. This is my attempt to sort of summarize this for you. So this is the Chris Mendez 3-step planning process. I don't know. I made that up right now. Please don't call it that. As you're planning, as you're thinking about the future, number 1, pray for God's leadership. Right? This is where right on the front end, hey, God, I got to make some big decisions. I need your wisdom. I need your leadership. What do you want me to do? Right? Then, number 2, you plan with his revealed will in mind. This is where you ask those 4 questions. Well, do the scriptures talk about this decision? Can I learn anything from the scriptures about this decision that I have to make? Have I consulted wise, godly people? All of that, you put that in the planning process. It's like if it doesn't, well, what helps me love God and become like Christ? What helps me love people? What helps me move the mission of Jesus forward? You wrestle with that. You think through those things, right? So you pray. God, I need your wisdom. Would you speak? Would you move? Would you lead in all of that? You plan with God's will in mind. And then finally, you purpose to hold your plans with an open hand. That it's, God, after I've done my best, I am open to the fact that you're God and you may change my plans. And I'm okay with that. I'm good with that. Now let me say one more thing. And this is my last attempt to sort of get you to buy in to what James is selling. You and I, and you know this, right? You know this, especially the older you get, you know this. You and I, we are products of the plans that we've made, the choices we've made, the decisions we've made in the past, right? You and I, where we're sitting, where we are right now in our lives, in large part is the product of the choices that we made in the past. The decisions we made, the plans we put in place. Hey, I'm headed here. This is what I'm doing, and we're the product of those things. Now, as we said before, you either look back on those decisions, those choices, those plans. You either look back on them with gratitude. I'm so glad. I'm so grateful. Oh, gosh, I almost didn't go that way. I can't believe it turned out. You either look back with gratitude or you look back with regret, right? You're either glad you had or you wish you did, right? Oh, just if I could only have a do-over, if I could just, that one night, if I could just go back, I would change, I wouldn't say that. It's like we either look back with gratitude or regret. And here's what I just want to say. You will never, let me say this. When you think where you are right now is the result of the choices you've made in the past, and you either look back with gratitude or regret. And the reality is, if you look back with regret, there's nothing you can do about it, right? Can't go back and change the choices that you made. Can't go back and there's no do-overs, right? All you can do, and you know this, is look forward, right? So who you're going to be and where you are in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, will be in large part a result of the choices, the decisions, the plans that you're making right now. And you'll either look back on those choices with gratitude or you'll look back with regret. But let me just say this. You will never look back and regret saying yes to God's leadership in your life. You will never look back and regret holding your plans with open hands. You will never look back and regret surrendering to God's leadership in your life. So surrender to God's leadership in your life today. Where in your life do you most need to hear this? What are the plans? What are the decisions? What are the choices that you're making right now that are going to impact the course, the direction, the outcome in your life? Take those plans and surrender them to Jesus. You will never regret saying yes to God. So let's be people who say yes to God.